first. I mean, you can't have missed this as a front page headline. New Russia threat. Nuclear sub warns off Putin's spy ship. We see you. We know what you're doing. Defense Secretary tells Moscow as Royal Navy races to protect undersea cables off Cornwall. I mean, you really could not make this up. It's John le Carre. You should be living at this hour. How on earth can this be happening? A Royal Navy attack submarine surfaced close to a Russian spy ship off the UK coast in an extraordinary warning to stop spying on British undersea cables, the Defence Secretary has revealed. And joining me to explain a little further is former Colonel in British Military Intelligence, Philip Ingram. Philip, thank you so much for coming in.
Good afternoon, my pleasure.
I mean, this is absolutely extraordinary, or isn't it? Is it the sort of thing we should know happens all the time, or is it something that never happens at all?
Well, we were the first to do it 111 years ago. The opening piece of the First World War was us cutting undersea cables across the Channel. And the Russians putting spy ships around our waters is something that happened the whole way through the Cold War. But then we took our eye off the ball. And therefore, it's nothing new. But it's highlighting the fact that our critical national infrastructure, a lot of it is in easy areas for hostile nations to try and intercept and to damage.
The way it's being reported, it sounds as if the Russian spy ship has a great big sign on the side saying Russian spy ship, because everyone seems to know exactly what it's doing. You would think if it was a spy ship, it would be a little bit more subtle and a bit harder to spot, wouldn't you?
Well, this is where our intelligence is pretty good. They do go around with Russian spy ship effectively written on them, because you look at the antenna and you look at what they're doing and you look at where they're going, you look at the way they broadcast themselves. And of course, ships have to have some form of identifier that goes out, and therefore they're all labelled. You
think it would say, Carnival cruise ship, and it would be dressed up as the Love Boat? You wouldn't think it would just say, "Hello, I am the spy ship. Come and look at me," would you?
Yeah, well, we have seen the Q ships, and we saw the reports of the damage of the cables in the Baltic by big tankers, and the tankers are part of Russia's shadow fleet. And whenever the Finns impounded it, they found an amount of spy equipment on the ship, and therefore there are the Q spy ships, so the covert ones, and there are the overt ones that go around.
And so what are they spying on? What are they trying to find out?
Anything and everything. So,
for example?
So they're hoovering up all the electronic signals. So they're watching how we react to them. So they look at our radars, they look at how we communicate, they'll intercept those. We're doing the same to them. But what they're trying to do is survey the sea floor. They're trying to look for where the cables are, look for areas where they could potentially damage the cables or intercept the cables or cause maximum damage if that's what they wanted to. Or for the communications cables, if they could potentially tap into them in some way. And this particular ship, the Yantar, has got lots of sniffing gear to hoover everything out of the atmosphere, but it's also got submersibles that it can send down and have a physical look at what's going on the seafloor.
But we've got submarines, and we weren't going to take any of their cheek and a damn chutzpah. Well, we sent that damn submarine down sharpish, didn't we?
Well, we did. And the submarine, we clearly realised that the ship didn't know it was there, so it wasn't a very good spy ship. And then surfacing it, I think the Russian captain went, "Oh my goodness, right, I've been embarrassed now." And they had a little bit of a conversation and the Russian ship tootled off very fast.
And will there be embarrassment in Moscow? Will Putin know about this and be embarrassed? Will he blush?
He'll have blushed slightly. The Russian ship captain will have been slapped on the wrists but told to go back and do it again. And it's a constant game.
When they come back and do it again, but they don't actually, thank goodness, cut any cables, and they don't actually do it, or do they? Are they kind of wreaking subtle damage when they come back, or are they just looking and thinking about it? What's actually happening?
Well, cables have been cut. We have cables from the Hebrides into the mainland UK cut. We've got cables in the Baltic that have been cut. We've clearly got the gas pipelines that have been cut. So we have to be wary of what's going on and expect them to be in a position to cut the cables if that's what they want to do. But therefore, we have to threaten them to make sure that they go away and show that we are monitoring them very closely indeed. And
just
stop
to
them from doing
explain it, I mean, lots of people listening will know the answer to this, but just to explain, if they should cut any of the really key sort of arterial cables, what are the sorts of effects that we would notice immediately?
Well, we rely on the cables to supply power from the continent, and so a lot of the electricity and everything we're relying on, because our grid doesn't generate enough, so we could suffer power cuts. All of our internet connectivity, we could get cut off completely from the world and isolated. So LBC wouldn't be able to broadcast.
Don't even say that. Don't even come into LBC and even suggest. Don't posit a theory of a world without LBC broadcasting in it. That'd perish the thought of that.
So we can threaten the Russian spy ship.
Get rid of them. Tell them to go away immediately.
Captain with you and the wrath of Vanessa, and that'll keep them out of our territorial waters.
How how seriously do we need to take this? How worrying is this? How, have we just shown that we can easily cope with it? And also you have said we're doing the same to them anyway. So is it just a kind of, constant kind of bubbling under of spying that goes on and we're not really that perturbed, or is this more worrying than usual?
It would be just normal activity if it wasn't for the fact that there's so many conflicts brewing around the world. And of course, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we're coming up to 3 years of there. Russia's aggression out into the West. Russia has been using Chinese ships, cutting cables in the Baltic and elsewhere. So it is now today a very real threat, and we have to be worried and we have to monitor it very closely.
All right. So one of the things we hear all the time is that we're not spending enough money on defence, and nobody seems to really realise the threat, and nobody seems to, it's only about 4 people in the whole country who take it seriously. Everybody else just thinks it's something that is never really going to happen to us, and we certainly can't afford it. We don't want to in a cost of living crisis. But are we in a fit position to deal with this or not? Is it something that needs much more money?
Well, clearly the Royal Navy have dealt with it, but we do need an awful lot more money. Unfortunately, from a political perspective, it is not sexy for the government to spend money on defence.
It is a bit when you've got submarines and spy ships involved. Suddenly, it is a bit sexy. I don't want to say the word sex to you in a mixed studio like this, but I mean, Sam, you said it first, and I feel I can reciprocate. It is a bit sexy all of a sudden, isn't it?
It is when you get into the James Bond lexicons that come into it. But from a Treasury perspective, Rachel Reeves has got other things there. But I class this as our in historical terms, our 1936 and 1938 moment where we've got Neville Starmer Reeves walking down the steps of the aircraft, waving the paper saying peace in our time. It's not. We've got conflict coming and we need to prepare for it. And it takes years. It's not something you can say if it happens, let's go and buy more equipment off the military supermarket. It takes years to build it, and it's bespoke built. So we need to invest today.
Okay, so we went from a really hilarious conversation about James Bond and sex to suddenly mentioning the Second World War, where suddenly we've gone into a completely different arena of desperate seriousness and threat, haven't we?
And unfortunately, James Bond is fantasy, whereas the other is reality.
No.
And we have to live in the real world. And the real world is the threat is growing, and we need to invest in our defence, which is good for our economy because it's investing in UK companies and will create more jobs and more tax revenue. But we need to invest in that as an insurance for insurance purposes as well, because the more we invest, the more capable we've got, the less chances there are of us getting involved in a bigger conflict. We are very weak at the moment, and therefore the chances are increasing that we could get involved in a conflict.
Is there any sense at which we are better at this spying lark than the Russians are? That we're going about our business so skillfully and adeptly that they don't know, whereas we've just outed them, haven't we?
Well, given my background, of course, I'm going to say we're much better than them. And the submarine, clearly, the Russian spy ship hadn't identified it was there. It was lurking covertly underneath them, and then when it surfaced, it caused them that shock, which was sending a very clear message. So, yes, I think from a naval perspective, we're better than them as well.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Flipping. We're absolutely fascinating to have you in the studio. I just wish we were theorising and hypothesising, and it wasn't all so real and also so incredibly worrying.
That's the trouble. It is worrying, and we need to take this seriously, very seriously.
Do you feel as if Keir Starmer is taking it seriously?
No, not at all.
And what do you think he doesn't understand that you do?
I don't think he's seeing the threat as something that the country can afford. He thinks that we can deal with this next week or next year or in 5 years' time. No, it has to be dealt with today. It takes a long time to prepare for this, and we are closer than he thinks. He's not seeing the reality of what's going on. He's thinking from an institutionalised short-termist view rather than looking at the longer-term issues. And
do you think Tory prime ministers were more sympathetic to the argument that you're putting forward, or less, or the same?
Not in the slightest. They were exactly the same. We did see some form of forward-leaning from Boris Johnson whenever he was dealing with Ukraine,
yes.
and we did lead the way there. Unfortunately, the current government seems to be reining back from that, which does not send a good message to Putin, and that just increases the threat to us.
There's just one word I haven't uttered to you. We've talked about sex, James Bond. We've talked about submarines. Is there anything? Is there anything? And Boris. Is there anything I haven't said? I'm going to say it now. Don't walk out. Trump.
Donald Trump is interesting. He's clearly upset Vladimir Putin because he's now threatening Putin with economic sanctions. That's not the answer that Putin was thinking, and Putin's not going to respond well. And of course, there was a conversation just after Trump got elected, before he was sworn in, where Putin's response was, "We didn't have a conversation," and then he put naked pictures of Melania Trump all over Russian national television. That's an old Russian spy sending a message back to Donald Trump, threatening him, saying, "I've got all this and I'm going to put that on Russian national television. What else might I have on you?
Has that been insufficiently covered in the British press, that story?
It was covered slightly at the time, but there's so much going on. It's not a priority.
I thought this
for
was
us.
a slow news week. Really? You think there's a lot going on?
If this is a slow news week. Yes.
No, not really. This is a hell of a news week, isn't it?
It is.
Absolutely every minute of every day. Philip Ingram, thank you very much indeed for coming in. Former colonel in British military intelligence. You will have seen the headline today: nuclear sub warns off Putin's spy ship.